With a special guest. Morning, Anne-Marie.
Good morning, John. That's right. A man that potentially could be running hearings about this or will definitely get a vote on it. The chairman of Financial Services Committee, Congressman French Hill of Arkansas. Good morning, Congressman. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So as Jonathan was saying, the Treasury Secretary over the weekend was talking about how Congress would have to act for these $2,000 tariff dividend checks the president has floated. Do you think that's something Congress would get on board with?
I think Congress would certainly consider it. I mean, my judgment has been that I think the tariff revenue that's sustainable, that people believe is sustainable in the years ahead, ought to be used to reduce the deficit. I think that would be a much better macro use of it. We are concerned about affordability in Congress. In fact, in our committee, we're going to have a hearing on housing affordability. How does federal policy, how could that encourage housing construction, development, and also improve affordability when we know the biggest barrier to housing affordability has been, first, unprecedented inflation, commenced by the Biden administration and the Fed's mistakes in and during and after the pandemic. But what can we do at the margin in federal policy to increase housing construction affordability?
Well, I remember when the second round of checks went out to the Americans during COVID, the Republicans really made it part of their criticism of the Biden administration was that they were goosing inflation. Could $2,000 checks do the same next year under a Trump administration?
Look, I think inflation is caused by too many dollars chasing too few goods, and I think the origin of this inflation, a 40-year high of inflation that we had after the pandemic, was due to fiscal mistakes by the Biden administration, approving and spending another $6 trillion in federal spending that we borrowed, and secondly, by keeping rates too low and the balance sheet too big coming out of the pandemic. We're now healing from that. Inflation is down. Oil prices are down. I think the consumers are going to feel better off in their pocketbook from that. But we have to be wary that one of the biggest concerns that families have is the affordability of housing, and that's where I think we should tackle that at the federal level by removing barriers to more affordable housing and access to credit for housing.
Jonathan and Lisa were just talking about Home Depot earnings. They said that ongoing consumer sentiment has been a little bit weak. There's uncertainty there. Of course, Walmart's going to be reporting towards the end of the week. That's your constituent. Have you been hearing from Walmart and other either small businesses or big retailers about tariffs and how it has been difficult to pass on some of these costs?
Well, I haven't heard so much about, I've heard both about passing on costs for some small manufacturers. You know, American small manufacturers, our country is filled with that. And about 50% of manufacturing inputs for small business come from abroad, and 50% are sourced domestically. And there are some American manufacturers and small businesses that don't have another supply source. So they are hit in the short run by across-the-board tariffs, which is why generally I've not supported across-the-board tariffs. I think you ought to target countries for bad behavior, mercantilistic behavior, non-tariff barriers, negative tariffs towards the U.S. market, or target particular industries you think should come back in the supply chains, whether it's steel, aluminum, and then target that over a long period of time. So, yes, I've heard from my constituents about this, and this is why I think the biggest challenge is not so much the tariff rate as it is in the uncertainty about planning around tariffs. And I hope the administration can come to the decision that they've made tremendous trade successes with many of our partners around the world. Let's embrace those changes and get those implemented, and that will give certainty to people planning for 2026.
You're having your first hearing today since the government has been reopened, and it's about deposit insurance. So when I think of deposit insurance, I'm always reminded of the sign at the bank that says you are FDIC secured up to $250,000. What kind of changes could we see to that minimum?
Well, over the last couple of years, Congress has had some hearings on deposit insurance about a couple of things. One, should the $250,000 level be raised? But due to inflation, it was last increased as a result of the 2008 crisis. Secondly, should we reauthorize the TAG program, which is an emergency program to guarantee transaction deposits in the face of a systemic problem with the U.S. banking system? That has been expired over the years, and so I think Congress should reconsider that and look at it. And then should we have a deposit insurance study at large about how deposit insurance is working for the American people? This is important. It's a priority for the committee, and it's a priority for the Senate Banking Committee, so we look forward to the discussion today.
How long would something like that take to actually do?
And what specifically?
Raising the $250,000.
Well, I think it could be raised according with inflation, but I think this is where I think a study and being data dependent is important. So many people make emotional decisions about finance. I think we ought to study, make sure we have the numbers, make sure we know the unintended consequences of any aspect of change of the deposit insurance system. You don't want to increase moral hazard. You want to maintain bank competitiveness for banks of all sizes. And that's important, and that's why I think we should take it in a deliberate way.
We talked about the kitchen table issues facing American families, what's going on in the banking sector. The headlines today, though, in Congress are going to be about this Jeffrey Epstein discharge position. Mm-hmm. How are you expecting to vote, and how do you think other Republicans will vote today?
I think people want transparency, and that's why Mike Johnson's done a good job, contrary to a lot of the mainstream media. Mike Johnson asked Jamie Comer, our Oversight Committee chair, to study this intensely, investigate it with subpoena authority, and he's released everything that's a DOJ or FBI-related document and the Epstein estate that can be legally released, meaning that's not covered by a court order not to release grand jury investigative material. The Massey proposal on the House floor that I think most Republicans and Democrats will support at the end of the day calls for releasing everything, irrespective of those court orders. So I think you'll see litigation. If this were to be passed by the Senate and it became a law, I think you'd see litigation about protecting the confidentiality in grand jury investigations, which is why I believe that the Comer approach and Speaker Johnson's approach was more deliberative and appropriate. But all, I think, Republicans and Democrats want transparency around the Epstein matter.
Congressman, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Great to be with you.
Great to see you in Washington. Great to see Congress back at work. Jonathan, Congressman French Hill, of course, also chairman of Financial Services. When it comes to a $2,000 check, sounds like everything is on the table. But his main concern is using those tariff dollars to bring down the deficit.